everybody. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC. I am Aaron Christensen, and today we're going to be doing another installment of our happy anniversary segments. We're going to be doing two, count them, two from Paul Naschy, Horror Rises from the Tomb and Hunchback of the Morgue. Although it would have been easy to do any number of 50th anniversary offerings from Mr. Naschy because he did no fewer than 10 releases in the year of 1973. I don't know anybody who loves Paul Naschy more than my guest today, so I'm going to bring in Jon Kitley of Kitley's Krypt to talk to us about Mr. Naschy and happy 50th anniversary to these two films.
Yes, happy anniversary to both of these unbelievably entertaining films. And I am kind of a fan. Yeah, you could say that.
I will say that. I did say that, in fact. When did you see? Well, we're going to talk about again. We're going to talk about Horror Rises from the Tomb and Hunchback of the Morgue. But when did you see Horror Rises from the Tomb for the first time?
Probably in the early 90s. I knew who Naschy was, kind of, and I asked a friend of mine who was a big Naschy fan to set me up with this guy because I don't know anything really about him. So he sent me two films, Night of the Howling Beast and Horror Rises from the Tomb. And Horror Rises was my first Naschy film, and it still to this day remains my favorite Naschy film because it's got everything in there. So it had to have been the early 90s, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen this film, but every time I go to revisit it, it never diminishes its sparkle. I mean, and not to imply that it had anything to do like Twilight. It's such an amazing film.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm my first experience with it was when you, as we were becoming friends, you were like, you need to sit down and you need to watch this film, like any good horror friend does.
Yes, yeah, it's a perfect introduction into Naschy, into Spanish horror, because, like I said, it's got everything in there that's going to draw pretty much any horror fan in there. It's going to draw them in, and if you like Hammer films, this is like Hammer films on crack.
Well, it's funny because as I was watching it, there's a bit of kind of that Italian horror aspect to it as well, and that it's just kind of pure cinema. There's less of a, like thought out mythology. It's just kind of like stuff keeps happening, and it's a nice mix of both Gothic and modern because we have it is ostensibly set in modern times, but we keep visiting these castles and folks running around in cloaks, and we're in dungeons and basements and things like that. So it definitely has that Gothic feel to it.
I think that's one of the things that really attracted me to Spanish horror in general is kind of like Hammer, where the locations fit with the movies. In Spain, and especially with Naschy stuff, they had all of these areas, these locations just there. So it wasn't like they had to build sets or do anything. They had these ruins and castles and catacombs that they could film in. Probably wasn't the most safe or healthy places to be filming, but they did, and it really sets the feel to these movies and the characters and everything. So I think it works perfectly.
And the script was written by Naschy as well,
yes,
as Jacinto Molina. And the rumor is that it was written in like 48 hours because he was told he needed a. Do you know more backstory on that?
Well, just that a producer had called him up and said that he had the chance of getting financing for a horror picture, but he needed it like now. So Naschy took the challenge and apparently took amphetamines and coffee and all this stuff and literally wrote it in a period of a couple of days or 48 hours. And which I think you can kind of see in the film, because it's not that it doesn't make any sense, but it's like everything in the kitchen sink is in here and we're going to throw this in. We got this in. But I still think it's an actually really good story.
I agree.
It's highly original.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it works. And plus the fact that Naschy plays not one, not two, but 3 different characters in this film. Now, granted, one of them is just in the opening, but
Right.
Naschy liked to do that, but he does it well.
I think you're right in that it's a great introduction to Paul Naschy because, as you say, you get a lot of Paul Naschy, but you also get his love for the horror genre. And
Yeah.
I know that's one of the things that is the main attraction for Naschy is that he was a fan first and came to the genre not because he couldn't get a gig anywhere else or because he was trying to use it as a ladder to get to other things. He loved horror films.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've always said, that I think he's, I know this is sort of blasphemy, but I think he's a bigger icon than Karloff and Lugosi and Lee and them, because those guys were taking the films that they were offered because they were typecast. Naschy set out to make these films. Like you said, he was a horror fan. He wanted to make these type of films. So he definitely was a fan, and he made the films that he wanted to make, and it's apparent on the screen of what he wanted to make. And I love the guy for that.
So set us up for Horror Rises from the Tomb. And it actually does set us up. Like there's a prologue that kind of unfurls the rest of this.
Yeah, the film starts off with a cart ride with 2 people in the back of this ox-driven cart. Just very peacefully. There's a babbling brook, and just very quiet, except it's taking these 2 characters to be executed. One of them is Naschy, who plays Alaric D. Marnac. I can never pronounce the freaking name, who's based on a real life character who is apparently not a nice guy. And his assistant, or his girlfriend, familiar, played by Helga Liné. And obviously Naschy plays Alaric. So they get cursed, they get the charges read from everything from necrophilia to vampirism to murder, all sorts of nice things. And then has his head promptly severed, just whacked off, and his headless body falls over. And then Helga Liné is hung upside down, naked from a tree. And we're not really sure what happens to her because it freeze frames when she's screaming, and then the title comes up. But I'm pretty sure she is. It's not pleasant what happens to her.
Yeah.
Then I don't know if it's 200 years or how many 100 years later, his descendant, also played by Naschy, and his friend, who's also a descendant of the ones that
condemned the 2
condemned them, yeah, go to a seance, and Marnac's spirit comes and tells him where to find his body and head to reunite them so he can regain his power. Now, Hugo, the Marnac's descendant, thinks this is all crap anyway, and he thinks it's a joke. So it just happens to be on his property where they're buried. So he's like, yeah, let's go and dig them up. This will be fun. And it's great, the fact that Naschy wrote this part of Hugo, and like in a lot of his films, he's not a nice guy. He's pretty much a jerk. So they go back to this country home, which is actually Paul Naschy's country home in real life, or was at the time. And they gonna find these bodies and reunite them, which it does. And obviously enough, it doesn't go well.
That is to an understatement. Yes, Hugo Almaric brings his friend, who's played by Vic Winner, they're not otherwise known as Victor Barrera, and he was another pretty popular Spanish actor, and he worked with Naschy several times.
Yep.
We have this resurrection, and I think both of those scenes are kind of super fun, and that we got basically you reunite, Almaric's head with his body, and that's all it took. He's back.
Yep.
But to resurrect Helga Liné's character, like he takes another person's dead body, puts that on top of the desiccated corpse, and then he lies down on top of that like he's having sex with both of them at the same time, because why not if you're Paul Naschy? And then
be the king.
Exactly. And then Helga Liné springs out in all her glory. And I was like, yeah, these are definitely made in that kind of 70s exploitation heyday. And this was after the reign of Franco, I think, at this point. And so things have been loosened up a little bit in terms of what you could get away with.
Yeah, the film has a lot of gore, a lot of nudity, and some of it was cut for obviously different countries that it was released at, and varying, some more than others. But thanks to the DVD and the Blu-ray that came out, you can see it completely uncut. But there's a lot to see. Like I said, both in nudity and in gore, it's all on screen and it's over the top. It's not. It doesn't shy away from what you're seeing on screen by any means.
For sure. And I think, again, as I referred to earlier, like it's just set piece after set piece after set piece. It really is. There's a lot of action.
Yeah.
And even if you do sometimes be like, wait, what's happening? You in the best of Italian horror, like you just kind of are propelled along by the sheer spectacle of what's happening on screen. And so even if you sit back and you have to get out of like a slide rule to figure out how we got from A to Z, the ride has been really exciting and fun. And like you said, full of good exploitation of nudity and gore and, intrigue.
Yeah, it's one of those that, man, it's just everything a horror fan's going to want is you're going to see on screen, and characters just line up and are murdered or slaughtered. There's zombies.
It's like sometimes they come back.
Vampire women, sort of, kind of thing. People getting their hearts ripped out. Somebody's killed with an axe. I mean, it has everything. And as an introduction, not only to Naschy, but if you're not that familiar with Spanish horror, this is also a great introduction, because you're going to see a lot of names and faces in this film that you will see throughout the genre over there, because there's multiple actors that not only work with Naschy several times, but just in other films. You'll see some of the actors in here in some of the Blind Dead films. I mean, they're just, it's kind of like Hammer, where you see, oh, there's Michael Ripper again. There's this guy. It's the same thing with these in the Spanish horror genre. You'll see the same actors popping up, sometimes in a bigger role, sometimes just in a little bit part, but the faces start to look familiar. And this is a great one to start with.
Well, and as I mentioned in the introduction, Naschy was a busy boy in this period, like between like 72, 73, 74. He was just churning them out. He did 10 movies that were released in 1973. In addition to these two titles, there was Vengeance of the Zombies, Count Dracula's Great Love, Curse of the Devil, which is another one of his Waldemar Daninsky films. So can you kind of speak to like why was this such a height of popularity for him?
I think if this was a time when Franco's power had stopped, I think that might be one of the reasons. Plus the fact that he started in the late 60s, I think they just became more and more popular. And Hammer was, oddly enough, dwindling down, but Naschy was kind of taking the reins over, but amping it up a bit, both in the content, in the nudity, and even in the gore. But I mean, look at the guy. The guy made 13 different werewolf movies, most of the time rewriting the character's history in each one. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Well, we already did a Waldemar Daninsky film. Yeah, I know. But this time he gets made into a werewolf because of this. So I love the guy's originality, where he's just like, I'm going to keep making these films. And I think in the early 70s, it was just exploding with popularity. Not necessarily in Spain, which is just a damn shame and really weird that he was more popular in Germany and in Europe, and not to a degree in the US just yet, but he was very popular except in his home country. When his films finally got released over here, thanks to basically Sam Sherman, who took Frankenstein or Mark of the Wolfman, which was his first werewolf film, retitled it as Frankenstein's Bloody Terror, even though there's no Frankenstein in it, and got it released
there
over
is
here.
now.
Exactly, yeah, there is now Wolfstein. But that introduced the U.S. fans to Paul Naschy, and then it just kind of exploded from there. A lot of his films were shown on TV, and then obviously the VHS market helped. But he was a busy guy up in that period of the late 60s to even into the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
He never stopped. And it always amazes me when you see these filmmakers making 5 films a year, 10 films a year, where you look at filmmakers now and it takes 2 years of pre-production to get started, let alone get it done.
Before we switch over to the next movie, can you speak a little bit about Carlos Ared? This was the first time that he and Naschy worked together, but
Well,
they collaborated a couple more times after this.
yeah, this was actually he was an assistant director on Werewolf versus the Vampire Women that Leon Klimowski had directed. So I think if memory serves, Naschy wanted Klimowski to do this one, but I think he was tied to another project. So he got Carlos to do this film as his first directorial debut.
Mm-hmm.
But then he would also do Curse of the Devil, Blue Eyes of a Broken Doll, and Mummy's Revenge.
Yep.
So he knocked out 4 movies with him, and I think those are all within. I think 75 was the last one. So 2 years he made 4 films with this one director.
Amazing. Amazing.
And then they kind of parted ways and didn't work together again, which is a shame because those 4 films that he did do are really, really well made films.
Yeah, they're all solid. So switching over to our next film, which is Hunchback of the Morgue, also from 1973. So this has, as you had mentioned, he'd already played, werewolves, he played mummies, he played vampires. So this was his opportunity to play a hunchback, and he plays one called Gotho. And but there's also a bit of Frankenstein mythos going on in this one as well. Do you want to talk about the plot for this one?
This one is actually goes against what I had said for Horror Rises, where he plays usually a jerk. This time he plays the character of the hunchback Gotho with about as much empathy and or drawing sympathy from the characters you can get. I mean, he is a mistreated individual in this town that even the children hate him and are throwing rocks at him at one point. But he's in love with this. Well, I don't know if it's in love, but has this connection with a young girl that he knew since childhood, who's dying of tuberculosis, I think, or some sort of lung disease. But she to speed the plot up, she eventually dies. He takes her body from the morgue because the morgue attendants are going to try to steal her jewelry and stuff. Ends up putting it in a crypt. She gets attacked by rats. He gets help from a mad doctor who says he's going to revive her if Gotho helps him build his mad scientist lab and develop this like walking turd monster. And then it just ends poorly for pretty much everybody. Is that a pretty speedy recap?
That's very accurate. Very accurate. Dr. Orla is our kind of, which is funny because he's kind of the villain of the piece. He's not. It's not Gotho, even though Gotho murders quite a few people over the course
very
of the
violently murders them. Yes, but he's still a sympathetic character, and the audience understands why he's doing it.
That's right, and he's trying to revive his dead love, Ilsa. So, but Orla, as you said, is trying to create artificial life, and rather than like piecing things together like Frankenstein, he's trying to like kind of grow his own creature. And it starts off with cells that start dividing, and it needs blood, so they keep pouring in more fresh blood, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it's growing out of its container, so they stick it in a closet, and that's when we start hearing it making really, really explosive noises.
Yes,
it's very demonstrative in its feelings about being stuck in the closet.
Yeah, he calls it a primordial creature, which some say is a nod to Lovecraft, but I don't think Lovecraft had any conception of what this thing looks like. But the screaming the wailing that it is constantly doing when it's locked away, you're just sitting there like, good Lord, what is going on here? But the story, and again, kind of like Horror Rises, the story is kind of crazy, and where the first part is on Gotho and his attraction. And I don't want to say attraction because it's not like he's in love with her. He loves her, but more as a friend.
Yeah. It's a pure love.
Yeah, exactly. Because once he steals the body, it's not like he has any weird ideas about the body.
Right,
He
right.
actually thinks she's sleeping, that Dr. Orla can actually wake her and bring her back. Which comes to so the scene where he puts her in the catacombs, which again, like I'd mentioned in Horror Rises, there's this amazing catacombs set that they were not a set, but a real underneath the ruins of this catacombs where they're filming a lot of this. He puts her there on a table, and when he comes back, there's rats all over the body. And this is really the actress, Maria Elena Arpon, laying there basically in her underwear with real, not just real rats, real sewer rats that they found in the sewers crawling all over her. And then Naschy comes in and goes nuts and starts throwing them off and then sets them on fire with a torch.
Yeah.
So
rats are definitely harmed in the making of this film.
Yes, but and I'm not defending any of this, but Naschy did get bit several times by these. So kind of he got what was coming to him, but it's one of those that
he didn't get set on fire.
He did not get set on fire, but I would not want to be bitten by a sewer rat.
No.
But it obviously it's a different time. We're a little laxed on what you can and can't do or should do.
Right.
But it's a pretty disturbing scene no matter what. But kudos to the actress having to lay there.
Oh, I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, so you're going to be playing a corpse throughout this movie. You're like, oh, okay, that sounds like a pretty easy job. You just have to lay there. Yeah. Except for there's going to be rats and goo all over you. Have fun.
I want to say there's a shot or two with one on her face.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, kudos to her.
So anyway, so yes, we have Dr. Orla. We also have his assistant, who I believe, is that Vic Winner again?
Yes. Yeah. Who's also, finding that guy's name. I mean, he's also billed as Victor Alcazar, I think is one of his names.
Okay. Yep.
And then you have Barara and then Vic Winner, which is his Americanized Anglo name. He's in it as well. Not a big of a role here as he had in Horror Rises, but he's also in Count Dracula's Great Love, Vengeance of the Zombie, and then in a non-Naschy film, he's in It Happened at Nightmare Inn, or Candle for the Devil as well. So he made, again, another familiar face that you'll see if you get into Spanish horror.
There's also like an insane asylum kind of next door, and that's where Gotho ends up getting a lot of the victims for Orla.
Yeah.
And there's like there's kind of like a kidnapping sequence. It's like, it's like a montage of Gotho running over to the insane asylum, grabbing another woman, hauling her over, dumping her in the vat, going to get another one, bringing her back. I was like, this is like a comedy at this point.
I think it's one of those that it hypes up the exploitation element. Because I think it's a girls' reformatory, not necessarily an asylum. And there's a fight scene in there, and the one of the doctors running it has got some nefarious shit going on. But yeah, he just goes in there. Apparently, it's easy to get in and out,
really,
except for the girls locked up in there. But yeah, he breaks in, grabs one, takes it back. So yeah, again, it's one of those things that it just let's amp up the exploitation element and throw something else crazy in here.
Well, and it's funny because, I mean, this was presumably not written in 48 hours, but I love how, like, the place in the catacombs just has like random Iron Maidens lying around, has a pit of sulfuric acid, just like, wow.
I think the acid might have been added. Although it does have a pit with a trap door or a sliding door.
It's just in there.
But all good scientists, seriously, all good scientists have that to get rid of their mistakes. That's really common.
Exactly. You got to have some place to put them.
Yeah.
And also Naschy, gets to be very athletic in this one. He's jumping around on rooftops. That's actually him. And he was, we haven't actually talked about Naschy here on the show before, but Naschy was a champion weightlifter.
Yes.
And that was what he was doing before he decided to become an actor.
Yeah, I think he missed out of going to one of the Olympics in the 60s. His name, his movie name, Paul Naschy. I think Naschy comes from a slightly different variant of another weightlifter that he was, that had inspired Naschy. So yeah, you can tell by his build, he's very muscular, powerful, stocky, which again, when he plays the werewolf is perfect for that role. Here, he's hunched over the whole time with a hunchback.
Yep.
And I got to say, that had to have been hell on his back. I mean, almost like a monkey.
He's also carrying people too.
He's carrying people. He's hunched over. He's getting rocks thrown at him. He's having to fight different people. So yeah, does a lot of moving around on here. The scene in the beginning where he gets into a fight with two orderlies who are trying to steal the girl's necklace, cuts off one of their heads and disembowels one of them. I mean,
with one of the random hatchets just lying around in the catacombs.
Well, no, that's in the hospital in the morgue.
That's what I'm saying. Why do you have
an axe in the morgue? Well, sometimes those
somebody
autopsies,
if they don't fit into the coffin.
There you go. But yeah, it's you can't watch this film and sit there and look at the realism to it, because I mean, how come nobody knows that there's this catacombs underneath the hospital?
Right.
Because the police can't find him when they're looking for him, and he's hidden down there, and
he's hanging out down there.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, we've alluded to it several times during our conversation, but he was also a writer. I mean, he wrote a lot of the screenplays, and he was very busy in that regard as well. I think he wrote like 11 screenplays between 72 and 73.
Yeah,
just during that heyday. Because he was very much creating his own opportunities.
Well, he started as a writer, and his first film, The Mark of the Wolfman, he wrote that for somebody else. They were going to try to get Lon Chaney Jr. to play Daninsky, but he was too old to play the role. So literally one of the producers said, why don't you play him? So he literally by accident became, I mean, he was doing bit parts in film and stuff, but he didn't write that role for himself.
Right.
But because it became really popular, might as well. So yeah, he wrote, and then eventually he started directing.
Right.
So again, I give so much kudos to the guy for consistently creating these type of films. And not to say that he only made horror films. He made crime films. He did a few period pieces. So he did a lot of variety of subgenres, but it was the horror genre that he really, really inspired to continue to make films in.
And celebrating his 50th these films' 50th anniversary, his legacy is quite pronounced, and it's only within the past, I want to say, couple decades that I think he's become appreciated at the same level of, say, Karloff and Lugosi and Price and Robert Englund and people like that.
Yeah, and there's people like me and a lot of others that were trying to do that, but thankfully, Naschy realized and saw that come to fruition before he died, because there was a time where he really debated on had he wasted his life making these films that nobody cared about.
Right.
He had no idea at that time the impact that these films had made throughout the world. Because again, you got to understand, this guy was making films in a country that did not want those films. Right. They did not like Spanish horror films. They did not. That's why a lot of his films the locations are somewhere else, because he wasn't allowed to have it based in Spain, because there are no werewolves in Spain there, guy. So
that's right.
You can't have them with a Spanish name or a Spanish location, because that doesn't happen here. So for the longest time, he never realized how popular he was. Even though he would go to Germany and get it, like for Hunchback of the Morgue, he won a Best Actor prize for this role. Eventually, in the early 2000s, I think he started to get the notoriety, and he was getting Lifetime Achievement Awards.
Yeah,
and all of these younger filmmakers started come up and praise him for what he had done at that time. So thankfully, he understood and realized the impact that he had made in the genre. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah, and if you're looking to kind of like dive into Paul Naschy, Shout Factory put out a couple of really nice box sets. We have the Paul Naschy collections 1 and 2. Those came out in 2017. Just boom, boom. So you got 10 films here you can dive into. Hunchback of the Morgue is featured on one set, and Horror Rises from the Tomb is featured on the other. So you can, sample both of these films, but also get a nice taste of his werewolf films. And some of the other things he was doing. There's an Exorcist film. There's a Giallo on there. So it's a great way to kind of get a good taste of what Paul Naschy was offering.
Plus, there's a lot of other films of his that have been recently released by other companies. So there's no shortage of finding any of his film titles now. Granted, he made quite a few, but
yeah, he did.
Compared to 20 years ago,
right,
you're searching, VHS bootlegs that are not the greatest quality or cut. Now you have a quite a wide variety of titles that you can find very easily.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you, Jon. So this is our second Spanish double feature. We'll see if we end up doing another venture to Spain for our next get together. Until then, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.